Welcome to WatchMojoUK, and today we're counting down our picks for the top 10 biggest strikes in British history. For this list, we'll be looking at some of the biggest strikes and revolts by groups in the UK and explore some of the stories behind them. Have you ever taken part in a strike? Let us know your tale below. Number 10. The Match Girls Strike, 1888. Life was rough for matchstick makers in the late 1800s, especially at the Bryant and May match factory in London. Not only were the workers subjected to 14-hour shifts, poor pay, and the threat of being fined by the employers, but they also had to cope with potentially getting phossy jaw, a necrosis of the jawbone caused by white phosphorus that the factory used. After one employee was fired in 1888, all the employees, mostly women and girls, at Bryant and May went on strike over the following days. The higher-ups promised to reinstate the sacked employee, but that wasn't enough anymore. They also wanted decent working conditions. Eventually, management relented to most of the demands, and the employees returned to work. Number 9. The Glasgow Rolls-Royce Strike, 1943. With men being required on the front lines, women stepped in to keep production going during World War II. And the Rolls-Royce factory in Hillington, Scotland was one such place. Primarily creating engines for aircraft, the women were told in 1941 that after 32 weeks of experience, they would get the same pay as men. By 1943, with women making up 2/3 of the factory's employment, on average, they were on 43 shillings per week, while men were getting 73 shillings. With a union recently formed at the factory, the women went on strike. The men soon joined their colleagues, bringing the total number of strikers to around 16,000. After a few weeks, management agreed to pay employees for their job, not their gender. Number 8. The Battle of George Square, 1919. After World War I, the UK's economy was in dire straits. With the military being demobilised, unemployment was climbing quickly. Trade union groups wanted to reduce the working week hours to increase available jobs for these former soldiers returning to the island. So thousands of people went on strike in Glasgow's George Square, and it got out of control fast. Riots soon broke out across the city, and violent clashes happened between the strikers and the police. Even the military was called in and turned up with tanks and machine guns. Altogether, 53 people were injured in the fights. After a week, the strikers and the authorities agreed to terms on a reduction of hours for the working week. Number 7. The Firefighters Strike, 2002 to 2003. In 2002, local authorities recommended a pay increase for firefighters of 4%, far lower than an independent review that said it should be 11%. With that, the Fire Brigades Union voted in favour of a strike and reportedly wanted a pay increase of 40%. The army took over responsibility for their job during the action. By 2003, after 15 days of strikes, the FBU finally agreed to a 16% increase. Another branch of the emergency services had its own issues over a decade later. Jeremy Hunt, then Health Secretary, proposed new, unfavourable contracts for junior doctors, which involved a pay cut and more hours. So they withdrew from emergency and routine care and went on strike in 2016. Number 6. UK Higher Education Strikes, 2018 to 2022. Looking to offset a whopping £6 billion deficit, the Universities UK, a group that represents university employers, proposed changes to staff pensions. However, the unions for the staff believed they would be £10,000 worse off per year in their retirement. On average, this could mean retired staff lose £200,000 altogether. So, they called for strikes. Tens of thousands of staff across 64 universities joined the initial protest. Students also mostly stood by their lecturers, even though it meant missing vital classes. While the staff eventually got what they wanted, further problems soon arose with low pay, pay inequality, poor working conditions, and further pension issues. Strikes have been going on up until 2022 so far. Number 5. The Great Unrest, 1911 to 1914. In the 1910s, things were bubbling under the surface for workers in the UK due to falling wages and the price of goods rising. As such, the standard of living for the working class was declining dramatically. This kick-started a period of labour revolt known as the Great Unrest. This event included numerous strikes, like the 1911's Liverpool General Transport Strike, 1912's National Coal Strike, and 1913's Dublin Lockout. Many of the protests turned violent. Throughout the unrest, there were upwards of 3,000 strikes, with 1,200 happening in 1913 alone. At the same time, the women's suffrage movement was taking off. Some people believed that if it wasn't for World War I, the UK might have seen far more strikes and revolts. Number 4. The public sector strikes 2011. With many public sector jobs seeing the value of their pensions plummet and the threat of having to work longer to get it, many unions across the UK called for a strike, and it was massive. 62% of England's schools were fully closed and another 14% were partially closed. Various ambulance services requested help from the police and could only respond to emergencies. Thousands of surgeries were postponed. Bus services, trains and airports were also badly affected. Reportedly, 2 million public sector workers went on strike, severely affecting the UK. However, some people were angry with the protesters. Whilst appearing on The One Show, Jeremy Clarkson stated that strikers should be shot, which drew many complaints from shocked viewers. Number 3. The United Kingdom Railway Strike 2022. After going through multiple lockdowns, overworked railway employees realised that their working conditions hadn't gone back to what they were pre-pandemic, nor did their wages increase to offset this. Also facing the rise in living costs, members of the National Union of Rail, Maritime and Transport Workers voted to strike in June, and it was set to be the biggest in 30 years, with around 40,000 railway workers protesting. They weren't the only sector to strike in the same month. The Criminal Bar Association voted to protest after seeing a fall in wages for barristers. Currently, many junior roles in particular are seeing their yearly wages fall to £12,200 due to legal aid funding issues. Number 2. The UK Miners' Strike, 1984 to 1985. For years, hundreds of mines had been slowly closed. By 1984, only around 170 were still operational. With the announcement of plans to cut the output of coal, which would result in further closures and job losses, the National Union of Mine Workers decided to go on strike, controversially without a vote. However, then Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher was prepared for this. She'd built a stockpile of coal after the miners' strikes in the 70s. Thatcher then used the police to break up pickets, which sparked a lot of violence. Known as the Battle of Orgreave, 10,000 miners and 5,000 police officers were involved in a brawl. By 1985, it was all over, and the government made no concession to the miners' demands. Number 1. The General Strike, 1926. This was said to have been the largest industrial strike in British history. The General Strike was taken by the Trades Union Congress after around 1 million miners were locked out of the pits by the owners until they accepted longer hours for less pay. Many workers from different industries decided to protest alongside the miners in solidarity. Up to 1.75 million people were said to have taken part on the first day. This resulted in clashes between the strikers and the police across the UK, with even warships being brought in. However, behind the strikers' backs, the union held secret meetings with the authorities and ended the strike. The miners, needing an income, eventually returned to work without their demands being met.
Do you agree with our picks? Check out this other recent clip from WatchMojoUK and be sure to subscribe and ring the bell to be notified about our latest videos.